The Supreme Court's conservative majority is a threat to the world. The Supreme Court spent recent weeks triggering political and legal earthquakes across America, but its latest audacious blow could affect the entire planet. After advancing the Republican Party's agenda by overturning the federal right to an abortion and loosening gun laws, the conservative court majority, built by former President Donald Trump on Thursday, limited the government's capacity to fight climate change. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices held that U.S. law did not give the Environmental Protection Agency the authority to set caps on planet-warming emissions from power plants. Given that President Joe Biden's $500 billion energy and climate plan is stuck in the Senate, the move dealt a significant blow to U.S. global leadership on the issue. Scientists are warning of the disastrous impacts of accelerating climate change, and as raging wildfires and parching droughts in the U.S. show that the crisis is already here. It was especially dismaying to the White House since it threatened to weaken Biden's authority on the global stage just as he was wrapping up a successful trip to Europe. The president collected several big wins, including solidifying NATO's front against Russia by brokering the entry of 2 new members, Sweden and Finland, and by orienting the alliance to further another key priority, building a front of international democracies to counter China. But his credibility on combating climate change, another key foreign policy priority, was dented by the Supreme Court ruling, even if administration lawyers will seek alternative ways to cut emissions and global market forces continue to make coal-fired power stations unprofitable or obsolete. Global climate action depends on a collective effort. Smaller countries won't cut their emissions if the biggest polluters like the U.S. won't. The tough political choices required to cut emissions are impossible for all to make if some nations avoid them. And other powers will constrain their own climate targets if they fear losing a competitive advantage to rivals that don't change their economies to lower reliance on fossil fuels. If Biden's capacity to reach ambitious U.S. climate goals is compromised, he will be unable to lead by example, and an already creaky plan to avert catastrophic warming across the globe could be in jeopardy. The United Nations was quick to warn Thursday that the Supreme Court's decision threatened to disrupt efforts to keep the rise in global temperatures below 2%, while pursuing efforts to maintain a 1.5% threshold. Decisions like today's in the U.S. or any other major emitting economy make it harder to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement for a healthy, livable planet, especially as we need to accelerate the phase out of coal and the transition to renewable energies, said Stéphane Dujarric, the spokesman for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. But we also need to remember that an emergency as global in nature as climate change requires a global response, and the actions of a single nation should not, and cannot make or break whether we reach our climate objectives. U.S. climate change leadership has often been erratic. The world is used to U.S. gyrations on climate change. President Barack Obama helped negotiate the Paris Climate Accord, which came into force in 2016. But his successor, President Donald Trump, who had previously declared climate change to be a Chinese hoax, walked out on the deal, declaring America is back. Biden took steps to rejoin the agreement within hours of being sworn in as president last year. The Supreme Court's move throws a wrench in Biden's ambitious plans to halve U.S. greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 levels by 2030 and to create a net zero emissions economy by 2050. This has certainly made it much, much more difficult, without a doubt, Carol Browner, who served as EPA administrator on the Clinton administration, told CNN on Thursday after the Supreme Court opinion was released. In essence, the court ruled that the Clean Air Act did not give the EPA the authority to regulate the carbon emissions from power plants that contribute to climate change. Because the law was enacted in 1970, it did not contain detailed instructions for the agency to combat climate change, which at the time was not a widespread global concern. Opinion that the act could not be used by the government as authority to introduce curbs to climate change. Capping carbon dioxide emissions at a level that will force a nationwide transition away from the use of coal to generate electricity may be a sensible solution